who can't make it can listen in afterwards. And so thanks everyone for joining. If you want to put your name and organization in the chat, just so we know we can take attendance, get a sense of who's in the room, that would be great. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce three important folks who are really leading this effort and part of a larger team who have been really focused on getting this off the ground. And we're really excited about this new incentive. And that is Elizabeth Krautscheid. And she's going to be doing the presentation today. And then also wanted to let Brian Biot and Lucy Fox introduce themselves from Action and ABCD. So maybe we'll have Brian and Lucy just give a quick shout out, and then I'll have Elizabeth take it from there. And we'll have them do the presentation. And then if and as you have questions, just throw them in the chat and we'll facilitate them during the Q&A, and we'll let other folks come off of mute and ask your question if you prefer to do it that way as well. So I will turn it over to Brian, Lucy, and then Elizabeth. Thank you.
Safe for me to introduce now?
Perfect.
Brian Biot, I'm Director of Energy Efficiency Operations at Action Incorporated. Action is the lead vendor for National Grid and the income eligible programs here under the Mass Save umbrella. So my responsibilities include overseeing day-to-day operations of the multifamily program at Action, and I work in policy matters as well.
Hi everyone, Lucy Fox at ABCD. I'm the Deputy Director of Strategy and Implementation and oversee the multifamily program. ABCD is the lead vendor for Eversource. Turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, everyone. So glad you're all here. Thank you for joining us today. We are very pleased to be doing this soft launch for you, and I'm going to share my screen. I also want to acknowledge that we have several folks here from Eversource and National Grid, and I don't have access to the full list, but I see Marge and Mike and Chris and Marlene and Ryan and Whitney. So thank you guys for joining us. They Lucy and Brian.
Yeah, we should talk to him.
Oh, and I'll just say, if everyone can mute themselves, I think Tim, I see your, yeah, that's great. And anybody else who's not muted, maybe Jim Linfield and Kevin Murray and Rashawn Keaton, maybe. Thank you. Okay, back to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, is everybody seeing my slideshow now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll just be looking sideways. You don't have to look at my video if you don't want to. So again, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to be giving you an overview and description of our rollout and launch plan and our current queue of projects for the income eligible deep energy retrofit pathway. So I think just about everyone is familiar with the standard lean programs through the Mass Save incentives. We have the direct install and the incentive pathways, and then the yellow ones are new. And I'm specifically going to be talking about the DER incentive, not going to be discussing the electrification incentive that is still under development. But the good news is we're coming up with a way to provide an incentive for natural gas to electric conversions. So what is an income eligible deep energy retrofit project? We are defining it as a retrofit that meets a 40% reduction in site EUI compared to existing conditions. And so that means we're really looking at significant retrofits with higher than standard measures, for example, to reach that 40% target. Electrification is not required.
Wait, the what?
Could everyone mute, please? I'm seeing a couple people not muted. Thank you. So as I was saying, it may include electrification. That's not required, but we are seeing it in several projects. Now, renewable systems do not count towards that 40%. However, we're very happy to see them, and certainly net zero goals are welcomed, and zero over time, for example, where we know that that renewable system is going to be part of it. It's just not part of the deep energy retrofit threshold. Savings are going to be projected through an approved TA study, which basically means an energy model of the final scope. And the other thing about defining these projects is that they are client managed and it's an incentive structure. So what is the incentive? It's fixed at $350 per million of BTU of projected savings. So as you see at the bottom, very simple math. If you save 1,000 million BTUs, you get a $350,000 incentive. This is calculated after the energy model called the TA study that I spoke about. It's not subject to cost effectiveness the way our standard pathway is. It's paid out at the end of construction after we do our usual inspection, and it can be either paid to the owner directly or to the contractor. There are some other benefits that are included in this pathway. For example, the TA study, there is support from the PAs to pay for that. We are also going to be creating guidance and coming up with an approved vendor list. This is, for some owners, the fact that this is owner managed and designed is also a benefit, so that's good. Contractors will still be subject to the PA background check, and we are still going to conduct our usual post-construction inspection. There's an additional benefit in that we're going to include commissioning about 6 months after construction, and that will be paid for by the PAs. And again, we will come up with exactly what is involved in that, but the owner will benefit through that final report with any issues identified that need to be addressed. And then also there will be some PR and marketing support, more details on that to come. So what are the requirements of our DER pathway? It's the same income eligibility you're used to, same application intake you're used to as well. As you can see on the right, I took a little snippet of the application. We added this question on whether the applicant is planning electrification or DER project, but otherwise it's the same. You need to have a feasible scope for achieving that 40% target. So this means that we are not going to be getting involved in scoping the way we do in our standard pathway. This has to be a well-developed project in terms of the design and the readiness. And then also a little bit different from our other pathways is we're going to be looking for supporting documents. That could be an owner-led audit, or it could be a capital needs assessment or a feasibility study, a passive house study, for example, pricing documents, the final bid. And also we have this thing we're calling the DER template that I'll show you in a little bit. The TA study is another piece of it that's required. The commissioning is required. And also we are looking to make sure that tenants are shielded from any utility bill increases. So that means either master metering if you're going to an electric heating system, for example, or there could be another approach that we would approve. That will all be done case by case. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about the TA study, what we know as of today. The purpose of it is to establish that final projected savings number so that we can calculate the incentive and validate that it meets that 40% threshold. It's not the same as a scoping or a feasibility study. It's fine to send me anything you have, any feasibility or opportunity studies, for example, but any savings calculated as you're deciding between scenarios, for example, are only preliminary and won't establish your final incentive. The TA study has to be done by a vendor approved by us. And so we will, don't worry, we will let you know how to get approved. And we already have a short list of some of the obvious ones. And then that supporting documentation on the energy model needs to be done by an industry standard tool such as eQuest, for example, has to be appropriate for multifamily. A proprietary workbook is okay. I've already spoken to a couple vendors about that. I will need to approve those, and that protocol is still under development. But I'm going to be looking for the backup documentation, the weather file, list of assumptions and inputs, and so on. Also, it is okay to do one building out of many on a site, for example, as long as you're making sure there's a representative of each building type, whether that be by construction type or size or possibly occupancy numbers and so on. I'm not asking applicants to do the extrapolation. We can do that in-house, but there may be data that I need to make sure that that is done appropriately. Some of the definitions I wanted to provide you today, just so that we all start to get more comfortable with this. We're not looking for a level 2 audit. This is a very basic audit just to make sure we have detailed existing building conditions. Our standard data collection form is sufficient, for example. A level 2 is perfectly fine to send me if that's what you have done. It's just that there's a lot of it that I don't need. The modeling for the TA study, I've pretty much already gone over that one. Baseline usage, this is an important one so that we're all in agreement. We are really looking for 2 to 3 years if possible. Weather normalized under any standard approach is fine. Just explain any deviations. And then EUI, as we all know, is the energy use divided by the square footage. I put this in here because we are going to be sticking with the federal definition of EUI, which is over gross square footage. And I know that that is not what is normal for some of you, particularly those who work on passive house. So I'm not looking for conditioned square footage as the denominator. And then again, consistent with the federal definition, gross square footage is basically anything attached within the building enclosure that might include a garage, not so typical in a multifamily, but it definitely does include basements and attics as appropriate. So how does the process work? This is a very simplified outline, but it does show you between the client and lien what the different parts are, since this is largely a client managed project. So we are expecting the client to have done upfront scoping, design, possibly the audit, and collecting all of the existing conditions. Doesn't necessarily have to do the modeling upfront because we can help with that during discovery. The application needs to be submitted and any of the documentation that the client has. Then I will do what we're calling discovery and validation. That those are just terms meaning I review everything. I make sure I have all of the information I need. I validate that it meets the 40% threshold, for example. I calculate the preliminary incentive, get back to the client. There may be some back and forth there, for example. We make sure that our audit form is completed and we do that TA study if we need to. Then it goes through the approval process on our end and back to the client in the form of a letter that the client then signs and then proceeds. Now, some of this is going to be done in parallel. These aren't necessarily linear steps. So I just want everyone to be aware that it's, sorry, she always does that to me when I have to do a presentation. And then the client handles the construction, sends us the invoice, and then we go out and do our inspection. We pay the invoice, and then 6 months later, we oversee the commissioning. This is another way of looking at that process. Sunny, sorry. On the left-hand side is the client responsibilities. We're looking for you to notify us of your intent, submit that application if you haven't done it already. And by the way, recently submitted applications, like within the last handful of years, are fine. We may even not need any updated information. You email me documents, you fill in as much of the project template, which I'll show you in a moment, as you possibly can. You collaborate with me during discovery, you sign the incentive letter, you manage your own construction, of course, and then you submit the invoice and cooperate with inspection and commissioning. And then we'll both get involved possibly in completing the audit if we need more information on existing conditions, maybe completing that energy model known as the TA study, and then filling out the project template. And then our responsibility on the right is, again, doing that discovery and validation phase, making sure the approvals get done, notifying the client of the approval and the incentive, and then overseeing inspection, payment, and commissioning. So what happens if a project doesn't meet the threshold? So, and that has happened recently. We either move it into our direct install pathway, if that is the best way to serve the owner, or possibly the standard incentive pathway, or we might move it into that new to be developed gas to electrification in pathway. Or it might be a combination. So many of you already know that we are meeting regularly with the stakeholders I've listed here. We do this in order to coordinate and be consistent across these programs that are all under development, with the City of Boston, DOER, for example. Also, it allows us to fill in the gaps or identify gaps that an owner might be facing in terms of getting their final design done, or their energy model done, or their assessment done. Or any gaps they have in final financing. And we, of course, give you the option not to have your information shared with the stakeholders. I will always ask and let you say no if you don't want to, but I do say that the benefit to owners is that you get more exposure, and it also allows me to interact regularly with a number of consultants that you all are working with, and that's very helpful in terms of facilitating the discovery. So here's a simple outline of what we've done so far. We got started in November. We did some early reviews December and January. On February, we started focusing on refining this pathway, better understanding, now that we better understand how it's going to play out. We drafted the process and so on. And now here we are in April with this soft launch. Very excited again to be here. And hopefully our webpage will be live in a week or so. And then we have a project that will be ready to start construction next month. We already have a couple underway, but they're not yet validated. And in June, we're looking to have that final TA study guidance and commissioning guidance, and also the electrification protocol ready. As part of what we're offering, I have created some program aids. Like I said, I'm about to show you what the project template looks like. It's a pretty straightforward spreadsheet. Many of you have already seen it. We're on version 10, by the way, now. So if you don't have the latest, let me know and I'll send it to you. We'll be doing the detailed guidance on the TA study, that approved vendor list, also commissioning, which I forgot to list here. And the webpage will have assorted information for you, hopefully some FAQs also. So here's just a quick snap of the project template. The first tab is the overall project information, the existing building conditions and the proposal, and also project costs. And it is it's simple, but it's also detailed at the same time. We really are looking to break everything out measure by measure, and to have as much specifics as we can get. And then in costs, we're looking primarily for the DER cost, but it's okay to tell me what the total project cost is too. I mean, that's actually interesting information and helps us better understand the picture, the whole picture that's going on. But we're looking at DER costs. We ask about any financing and whether it's earmarked for DER, just so that we can better understand your gap and your needs and where this incentive fits in. So here's our queue. We have 13 projects actively either under review or just about ready for approval that are DER projects. And the two that I validated, it looks like about 1.2 million in incentives potentially, and two more pending validation at about 1.8 million, not each, that's total. And I would say, because I know someone's going to ask, so what kind of savings percentages are we seeing? It's the high 40s to mid 50s. I have one that's potentially at 69%, but that's very preliminary right now. It's just they are aiming for passive house, so I expected them to be on the high end. And then we have 4 that are test cases on this new gas electrification pathway, which means they're not doing additional deep energy retrofit work. It's just their heating system or their water heating system. And we have 15 more that we're calling the leads, that I've heard about them, and I'm just waiting for information or a chance to speak to those clients and help them get started. And here's a slide with our contact information. Again, we hope to have the webpage up in the next week or so, which will have all of this information and contact information and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was great. And as I mentioned in the chat, we'll share the recording and the slides with folks, and then these resources, the webpage once it goes live as well. And I think there's just one question in the chat from Marty asking about timeline. So what the allowable gap is between the end of the utility data and when you might apply to this incentive program. Is that, Elizabeth, do you have a sense of, does it need to be utility data right up until the application, or is there any gap that you can allow?
That's a great clarifying question. I'm seeing within the last, I guess if you're submitting in 2023, what I'm seeing is utility data like 2017 to 2020, for example, or 2019 to 2022, like those ranges are fine. I wouldn't want to see anything much older than that, which does get to a related question of how old is a relevant audit, for example, right? We'll kind of know it when we see it, I think. And please, if any others of my team have an opinion on that, jump in. But everything should be within the last few years, I would say.
Great. And Bev asks if there's a dollar amount for the TA study or model that's been approved by or for the approved vendors? Or is
Not
that-
yet.
Okay.
No, not yet.
Do you think it looked like from the timeline that by the end of June that some of
Mhm.
that some
That's
of those
what we're
things would-
aiming for. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And there's probably going to be like a cap number that may remain undisclosed for an obvious reason.
Yep. Okay. Drew has a question about the new federal Homes and HERA funding and how that plays into this funding. And maybe someone from DOER maybe wants to share a little bit more information, but our understanding is that the Homes and HERA incentives will be available through DOER in 2024. So that can play, and our understanding is that it will play alongside this funding so folks can maximize both sources. Alyssa, I see you came off. Do you want to share?
Yeah, I'm just confirming everything you're saying. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that
Great.
funding goes to DOER and, we'll be setting up programs with that funding that meets the goals for that funding according to the statutes and DOE guidance, which is still forthcoming actually, so.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alyssa. And Dave asks the program's award budget by year and if there's a limit number of awards to a single owner entity. I think, Brian, you mentioned like maybe yes and no, but is there any additional guidance on that or approximate budget numbers that folks that the team has in mind?
I don't know if one of our people from the PAs want to jump in on this one, but this is not a budgeted pathway in that sense, in the traditional sense. And we don't currently have a cap in mind per owner or anything like that.
Elizabeth, this is Mike at National Grid. Yeah, I think that you're right on there. There's not a specific budget for this. This is in the fold with our other projects. And obviously with some of these projects, depending on the size and the scope and the timing, they could run into a different year. So again, these will be looked at as we look at any of the multifamily projects.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mike and Elizabeth. It
And
sounds
if I
like,
could jump in,
oh, please.
Emily,
yeah,
this is
go,
James Collins, ABCD. It's a good point that Mike brings up, where it's really critical for folks and helpful for us if they are applying or at least have some information on the number of projects they have, not just one at a time, so we can have that timeline vision.
Great. That's a really good point. Would you like folks, if they have if they're planning on putting in multiple projects, would you like them to put them into the queue on your form online? Or would you like them to follow up with additional, like an email that would kind of say, here's the project or projects we are putting in right now, but we anticipate these next ones are coming down the pipeline and provide some sort of timeline via email? What would be the best way to message the refinance, the anticipated rehabs ahead?
I would prefer that if something's not going to get started until the next year, for example, give me an email list of what you anticipate and then submit the applications if needed. Again, if you're already in the system, you may not need to, but submit the applications closer to when that construction is going to start or when you're ready to activate it. I realize that's a little vague. I'm perfectly happy with email lists. I don't think we don't need everybody to submit their lien applications all at once, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's helpful. So if folks have individual questions, maybe we can have them follow up with Elizabeth as well on your portfolio. Marty asks how applicants will be notified if their application has been kicked to one of those different pathways that you mentioned, Elizabeth, the standard or direct install or the electrification incentive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have what I call a discovery call with owners, and we discuss it then. This doesn't rise to the level of a DER, so here are the options. Here's what I would recommend. What do you want to do? It's that kind of a conversation.
Great.
And I'll add to that, when you submit the application and you check that your project is likely going to fall in that path, that helps us identify that that's the path you're interested in. And so we can more quickly get that over to the right team.
Thank you, Lucy. Frank asks about the commissioning scope. And the question is is the expectation that the project team will hire their preferred vendor for commissioning, or is there a list of approved firms?
Mm-hmm. We're not there yet.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Great.
Mm-hmm.
Neil also is asking about the TA study or that energy modeling. How are you thinking about accounting for adding ventilation and central cooling to buildings where it doesn't exist yet? Should a baseline be defined if a building doesn't have acceptable ventilation currently?
Ooh, that's a great one for the technical evaluators, I think, at the PAs. How do we want to, those are some of the program standards that we still have to develop.
Okay.
But I know in multifamily housing, that's a big consideration. So thanks for reminding us. Yeah.
Great. Eva is asking about, and I think, Elizabeth, you touched on this a little bit, but maybe just to clarify it out a little bit more, if someone's already has applied in the lien application, if they're going to do it, they're interested in a deep energy retrofit or electrification path, should they reapply, or should they email you and say like, hey, I put in my application last fall or last summer, but it's now, we want to bump it to this?
Yeah, perfect. Perfect, because we're seeing that happening already. No need to submit an additional application. You can just email me, or this contact form, like I explained, is it's just a way of tracking all of these bits of information and questions in one place. So feel free to go to the webpage, notify me through the contact form, and then I've got it already in my tracking system and I can follow up. We have the ability on our end to simply create a copy of an application, give it a DER extension, right, and turn it into a new project record. So that's why there's no need to submit an additional application.
Great.
And Elizabeth, if I can just chime in a little bit, I think, and there'll be more to come on this, but on that ventilation question about additional ventilation, I think we are using existing conditions. So if ventilation is being added, it's going to need to be overcome with some other energy reductions.
Oh, thanks, Mike. Okay.
That's interesting, Mike. Even though the overarching, you don't have to have it be cost effective on the overarching, that you're talking about in terms of energy savings. There has to still be 40% energy savings with the added ventilation. Correct. Interesting. And that can't be like qualified, or it can't be pulled down by like a non-energy benefit or something like that.
That's right. There are no non-energy benefits in this calculation.
Good to know. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Next question from Marty again. So the commissioning, it sounded like it was 6 months out. Is it a one-time commissioning, continuous commissioning, or either?
I think that just one time. We're not quite there yet. So yeah, please stay tuned on that whole commissioning topic.
Okay. Great. And then Liz is wondering about the historic utility data part. So will the building's public meter data suffice, or do we also need to collect individual tenant data?
Yes. we do need individual tenant data, and that is something we can help with since we have access to it, as long as we have all of the account information.
Great, thank you.
It's definitely gonna impact, like, you know, depending on who's paying for the heating and cooling load, so.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's it on our questions that are written in the chat. But if others have questions, if you want to, you can raise your hand using the reactions button or put it in the chat. Oh, I see Alyssa added in a question. Alyssa has a couple of questions. So in terms of that project review process, are there timelines for each step? How long will it usually take the applicant to know whether their project is being funded and how much?
There's no timeline right now, Alyssa, because it's very much case by case at this point. We've had to feel our way through these reviews, and the applicants, the same thing. You know, what do we need? What do they still need to submit, and so on. I would like to think we'll have more of a flow, an idea of the timing in another handful of months, once we've gotten through the current queue, for example, and we know what we're looking at, like what's coming into submission.
And I'll add, we do have a process flow document that kind of shows the steps of in another way than what was already shared in this deck. But Elizabeth, you can, I think, speak to in depth, if anyone wants, the level of engagement that's really required to understand what is happening in the project. And what those discovery conversations really are is that detailed review of the project documents and what you're trying to achieve. And it takes time. And so, Elizabeth, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that piece of that you can be in discovery or conversation for a while to get it to the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on how prepared the applicant is to provide the information that I need. For example, how responsive are they? How responsive is their consultant who has time to deal with it, right? Or whether we actually need to gather more data, send one of our auditors out, for example, to confirm something. So there's a lot of factors here at play. And that's another reason why it makes it hard to put any kind of general timing onto it.
Yeah,
Also,
no, I can understand.
We've been developing the program, as you know, as we've been going.
Yeah.
So that also has really held us up, right?
Oh, yeah,
It
no. I'm partly asking just because, you know, of DOER's fund and just trying to understand, like, you guys actually have more experience than we do in this, and we have a funding opportunity kind of out there in the world. So that's why, but we could follow up separately. That's why I was asking. Not,
Yeah, I'd be happy to
Yeah.
talk to you about that and tell you what I've learned and so on.
yeah,
Sure.
exactly. Yeah.
it
And then
also
just, I'm sorry. What were you
no,
gonna
it's
say?
okay.
I was just going to say, my other question is just, if the project is funded, does the payment happen like along the way or at the end? I'm just wondering how you guys are handling that. It seemed from the slides like it's happening at the end when the project is complete, but I wasn't quite sure.
So we have concluded that we can do phased completion payments, but that it has to be, for example, for if all of the insulation gets installed in one phase and it's completed and it can be inspected on its own, and those savings
Okay.
by that measure are identified, then we can pay for, you know, we can submit a partial payment based on that invoice, right? What we can't do is any kind of regular phased payments that aren't tied to a completed piece of the installation.
Yeah, got
Right.
it. Okay, I understand. Thanks.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And then Wendy is asking about the master metering portion, and is specifically whether the entire project has to be structured so that all the utilities are paid by the owner to shield residents from increases in utility costs. Or I know you, Elizabeth, had mentioned that there might be other approved pathways on a case-by-case basis. Is there anything that you can more details on that right now, or is it to be
Well, I
clarified.
can give you a couple examples. This is going to be case by case. There is no single approach that's going to work for every single site or every single owner or even every single set of occupants. So we have projects where the owner currently pays for heat and hot water, natural gas heat and hot water, right? And they're installing heat pumps, and the majority of the system is going to continue to be on an owner account, but the individual units will have a small sort of fan load, if you will, added to their bill. So that is an example where the heating system is mostly master metered. There's going to be maybe a small addition or a small load addition onto the tenant electric bill, but they're not going to be using their current plug-in window air conditioning units, so that usage goes down. So if you look at it on net, there's no increase to the tenants, right? In other cases, it's straight up the owner pays for everything. So those are a little bit easier to account for. I'm also in conversations with a couple people so that I can learn more about the other approaches out there, such as utility allowances and so forth. And so that's one way we're engaged with the stakeholder group, is better understanding what all of those different approaches are and what we would need to collect in order to review them and okay them.
Yeah. That strikes me as something that maybe could be a good future energy cohort session. Like if there are promising practices that folks have created for utility allowances or other ways of decreasing energy burden, that I think we'd want to definitely lift those up. So Elizabeth, if and as you're finding out ideas or solutions, we want to hear that, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting and important topic. I'm looking forward to learning. So sure, that sounds great.
Great. Okay, Robert I think this is a similar question to, I think, what Alyssa, the phased payments that we have been talking about. So what impact do you think payment on completion is going to have on income eligible properties, whether there's going to be sources of bridge financing that will help with that? And I don't know if there's others on the call, like from Mass CEC or elsewhere. I know that folks are thinking about the usage of, or the need or scoping of bridge loans for this sort of payment that would come in at a later date. So if anybody, Bev, I see you, if you have any.
What's going on here?
There's certainly going to need to be some sort of bridge financing, because this incentive is not going to cover the full scope of these projects. Plain and simple.
Right, that's yeah. And I guess what I think the question here is, obviously this will be not the only source of funding, but for this source of funding, if there is a timing mismatch, how owners can maybe access additional bridge loans for until they get this portion, this incentive.
Do you mean a bridge loan through lien? Is that what is being asked?
No.
Okay.
No. This
Okay.
would be an outside entity.
Okay.
Like a
that makes
bank.
sense. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's going to be needed. Yes. Mhm.
Yeah.
Beverly came off of mute. I think she's
Don't
about.
stop. You have a green light.
Wheezy, if you can mute, thank you.
I
Beth?
think the state's very aware of this timing issue and how it could affect affordable housing. So, you know, it's being talked about as a need, is what I would say.
Great, thank you, Bev. So more to come on that. And Marty is wondering about any of those current projects that have added ventilation or cooling that have hit the 40%. Are there any among those 13 or the ones that you have listed that are adding cooling or ventilation and they're still hitting 40%?
I don't no, not in the ones I validated, in the 4 that I've or the 2 that I validated and the 2 more that I are nearly validated. I don't think they're adding ventilation. I could be wrong about that. Marty, I'll have to get back to you. I just don't remember the details specifically.
So maybe
most of it is improving the ventilation. They're replacing existing ventilation systems or not addressing it at all from memory.
Great. well, not great necessarily, but it's good to know. Dave's asking again about this, adding the ventilation or central cooling to buildings where it doesn't exist currently. So wondering if there might be a possible pathway to model to use, let's see, use and demand and add on top of the baseline. Do you want to say this, Dave, where can you come off mute and ask? Potentially not.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible now.
Oh, fantastic.
Go for it.
Thanks. Sorry for that. I was typing like mad. But essentially, I'm just wondering if the method is settled, as Mike was talking about, or if there is space to sort of modify existing conditions as would be reported on utility bills to capture, you know, to really present a higher existing conditions EUI, so that the percentage doesn't become effectively a barrier to accessing these funds. And maybe I'll leave it there rather than getting into sort of philosophical and practical positions on the issue.
Sure. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, I have to defer to the PAs on that one.
Okay, well, if and as there's additional information on that or clarification, that will be good, because it seems like a lot of projects may get bounced back into the electrification pathway otherwise at a lower incentive amount. So just trying to maximize ability for folks to participate in this great program. Okay, Stefan is asking about, what do you see as a potential payout with current projects you're reviewing? And maybe that would be helpful if there's like a per unit price average that you're seeing, and or any other information you can provide.
No, I calculated that because again, Emily, you'll remember that the stakeholders were very keen to think in terms of per unit dollars as well. And I understand that that's a standard, metric. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing any kind of consistency. It depends on the number of units. It depends on the scope. This is such custom work that it's all over the place.
Is there maybe a low and a high that you could share?
Yeah, I think the low was around 11,000 per unit and the high was in the 20s.
Great, that's helpful. And Robert is asking, whether the lien, whether this program, this incentive application can be made after the project has started. For instance, financing approved, construction start, like, does it have to still be in the planning phases? When's kind of the last date at which a project could be eligible to apply and still be considered for this incentive?
Yeah, I'd like to take that back to the team and discuss it. We haven't thought that through. I am seeing it though already. We have one project in the queue where construction has started, but they're holding off on a building that they want to do some additional work on. But let me take that back to the team so we can thoroughly consider it and make sure that we're, creating the correct policy around it.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Folks can put them in the chat, or if you raise your hand, or unmute, we can take them as well. Elizabeth, it looks like you and the team have answered all of the questions. So
amazing.
Well, thank you so much for this really exciting new program rollout. We're just thrilled to have this be available to folks, and really want to make sure that everyone can take full advantage of it alongside the DOER, City of Boston, some of these other deep energy retrofit or building decarbonization incentives that are that are coming out fast and furious from the state, federal, local levels. So really appreciate your time today. And again, we'll share these recordings and slides and the resources that we mentioned with everybody as it comes available. And if folks have questions, you can reach out to us. Elizabeth will have, I think, your contact information and or that contact form for folks to reach out to your team. And again, just lots of gratitude for all the work that has gone into this, and we'll continue to be working on this and with all the partners in the room. So thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here today.
Great. Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday or non-holiday spring weekend ahead, and we'll be in touch with the materials, and we'll see you in the future at another energy cohort. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.